Well, howdy, kids. Once again, I had a very compromised week due to some off-the-field obligations and medical stuff, so we're going to have a short show. This may be the case for another couple of weeks. I have been desperately trying to stave off another minor surgical procedure. It's minor in the sense that it isn't as invasive or as risky as brain surgery, but it's still no fun at all. The aftermath is debilitating and will break a nice run of productivity I've had of late. It is difficult for me to express how simultaneously depressed and angry I feel about this. It's a loss of time on the front end, it's the discomfort and anxiety of a medical procedure in the middle, and it's a period of recovery on the back end, which I will not describe for you, but again, is no fun at all. It's still an outpatient surgery, for all I know, with the way insurance companies operate nowadays. That brain surgery I just mentioned, you could have a frontal lobotomy and still be kicked back onto the street that same afternoon. You might recall several years ago, during the run of this program, I needed to have dental surgery. Much of the procedure was covered. However, anesthesia was not. I only needed a single tooth attended to. What the plan said, and I'm not kidding about this, is if you have 2 or more teeth that require surgery, we'll cover the painkillers, but if it's just one, you gotta raw dog it or pony up, bro. A little over 80 years ago, one of the great comedic film directors, Preston Sturges, made a film starring Joel McCrea with his favorite second banana, William Demarest, a more or less serious film about the invention of dental anesthesia. It was released under 2 titles. One was Triumph Over Pain. The other was The Great Moment, which it really was. Neither title came with an asterisk that said Triumph Over Pain unless you only need one tooth worked on, in which case you're either going to be out $1,000 or be in quite a bit of pain after all. What I require is not dental surgery, but something else, something more internal. It should not be dangerous. However, as I said, it is still unpleasant as hell and will leave me in more pain going out of the hospital than I was coming in, at least transiently. I have done this 3 times now, I think maybe 4. It's a recurring problem for me. I've been waiting for about a month to see if things would get better on their own, even though I kind of knew that they wouldn't. But, well, today I faced the facts and scheduled the damn procedure. And in the near future, I will go to the guillotine head held high, but not held on for very long. No, wait, I'm confusing myself with Marie Antoinette. I do that sometimes. So, as you can hear, I'm frustrated. I haven't had time to do all the plunging into deep research that I usually do for this show. I cannot tell you something that Uncle Robbie said back in 1929 when the Dodgers landed all 9 batters on third base at the same time. I'm sure it's out there. I just haven't had the extensive time that I usually take to dig in and find you that pithy Uncle Robbie quote, which I know you're all looking forward to when you tune in each week. And so part of what I'm saying is please be patient with me if you are a longtime listener. If you are a new listener, for gosh sakes, don't judge the show on this episode or the last one, which also fell prey to this affliction of mine. But please give me grace so that I might serve you better in the future, entertain and edify you with a longer show, a more informative show as we get past this, you and I, together. And I will try to find my optimism. To borrow from the carousel of progress, there's a great big beautiful tomorrow on the other side of all this, in which I am not in pain and no longer have to worry about this sort of thing for a while, until next time. As Casey Stengel said, don't give up. Tomorrow is another day, and that's myself. I really do hope it's me too. That concludes the special pleading part of the program. Let's get on with the show, such as it is. As I speak these words, I have just finished writing up the last Dead Player of the Day post for this week. It's on Hall of Famer Buck Leonard, one of the greatest players in the history of the Negro Leagues. He was teamed with catcher Josh Gibson on a ridiculously stacked Homestead Grays team that won 9 consecutive Negro National League pennants from 1937 through 1945. Add up all those years, and they played at a 683 pace. That is, if they had played 162 games a year and maintained that pace, they would have won 111 games a season. Imagine a team that spent 9/10 of a decade playing like the 1954 Cleveland team. In addition to Leonard and Gibson, who were there for that entire run, at various times they had Cool Papa Bell, Judd, Boojum, Wilson, Ray Brown, and Leon Day, all later Hall of Fame inductees, although Day didn't stick around very long. Despite the presence of those other big names, Leonard, the first baseman, and Gibson, the catcher, were the heart of the thing, and show just how distorting it can be to the competition, in a positive way for the Grays, I mean, when a lineup has not one player, but two blasting away at a level 90 or 100% better than the league baseline. If we're talking about the American and National Leagues, only one team can say it had that on a full season basis. 4 editions of the Yankees when they had Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. Those seasons were 1927 and 28 and 1930 and 31. What's interesting about that is they didn't all win. The first of those teams is still counted among the greatest of all time, and the second repeated as World Series champion. In both cases, they swept, which is just something that happens with some World Series winning teams, but in their case really does seem like an expression of their dominance. The 30 and 31 teams, however, were 1,000-run offenses. Certainly they were boosted by the era, but still not every club scored 1,000 runs, but they just didn't have the pitching to keep pace with the Philadelphia Athletics at that moment. The infield defense that year didn't do the pitchers any favors either. By that year, I mean that first year, I apologize, with Gehrig, who was a lot of good things, obviously, but he wasn't Keith Hernandez around the bag. Tony Lazzeri at second, similar idea. Lynn Larry at short, we've talked about him at length, a good hitter for the position, but not the rangiest fielder. And young Ben Chapman, reprobate, at third. He was so good at the hot corner that the next season he was moved to left field for the rest of his life. The A's couldn't hit as well as the Yankees, but they were more than good enough. By not being able to hit as well as the Yankees, I mean they were more of a 900, 950 run offense in that environment rather than 1,000, whereas the pitching staff, led by Lefty Grove, was dominating. That more balanced roster won the day, at least for that 3-year period, 1929 through 1931, and then, as you know, a cash-strapped Connie Mack, bleeding out financially due to the effects of the Great Depression, broke that team up and was never able to get back on that horse again, not in a real way. There's some irony in that the Great Depression giveth and the Great Depression taketh away, simultaneously with Connie having to break up that great club and scatter Jimmy Fox and Al Simmons and Lefty Grove too all around the league. Mickey Cochran, can't forget him. Down in South Carolina, a young Buck Leonard was finding himself out of a job for the same reason, this worldwide economic slowdown. And in order to help his family, he turned to baseball and headed north and wound up in the state of Pennsylvania, just like Connie Mack's A's. The Grays, of course, started out playing in and around Pittsburgh and then later on split their time as kind of a 2-city team. The same thing the Rays floated a couple of years back with Montreal, I seem to recall. But no one restrained the Grays from spending part of the year in Washington, D.C., where they rented out Griffith Stadium and kept Clark Griffith afloat for as long as the color line lasted. It's an interesting thing to learn that having 2 god-level hitters at their peak doesn't guarantee you anything. If you don't have the pitching, you'll just lose 10-9. Indeed, both those Yankees teams, 1930 and 31, had losing records in 1-run games. That's luck too, of course, but I think when we're talking about a 2-year sample, it argues for drawing some conclusions. Holding them tentatively, perhaps. I haven't looked at all the 1-run games, but it just seems likely that the pitching let down in those situations. I grew up with Yankees teams that were very much like that. Rickey Henderson would single and steal a base, Don Mattingly would double him home, and Dave Winfield and Don Baylor would homer. And then in the next 2 innings, Phil Negro would throw a series of flat knuckleballs that still haven't landed all these years later, and they'd end up losing 7-6. Well, unlike those Yankees teams, whether we're talking about 1930 and 31 or 1985 and 86, those Grays teams had a lot of everything. They had a lot of hitting, and they had pitching, very good pitching. They were more like the 1927 and 28 Yankees in that way, albeit in smaller samples. They belonged in a higher league, and there was a higher league, but they weren't allowed to compete there for cosmetic reasons that have no logic or reasoning behind them at all. Prior to and during the civil rights era, fast fading now, aggressively being diminished or defeated by a rearguard action by people who were young back then and resented it but are in power now. There were all kinds of battles in terms of equality in public accommodations, meaning that lunch counter that wound up in the Smithsonian. That if definitionally you were an American, then all Americans have the same package of rights that comes with the laws that the country has enacted, and therefore anybody who walks into a Woolworths, and that was a thing at that time, the lunch counter at Woolworths, or today into an Olive Garden if they so choose, they all have the right to sit there and be served. We all recall Rosa Parks saying that she wasn't going to sit in the back of the bus. She paid for her fare. Her fare cost exactly as much as anyone else's, no matter what their complexion, and so she had a right to sit anywhere that was fair game for a customer of the bus company to sit. Jackie Robinson took a very similar stand when he was in the Army and caught hell for it as well. Less remembered is that there was also a battle for swimming pools. I'm not referring to the event during the so-called Red Summer of 1919 when Chicago bigots threw rocks at a poor black teenager who had crossed an invisible line in the water of the lake, not a swimming pool, but one of the great natural bodies of the world, one of the Great Lakes. There's that classic Brown, De Silva, and Henderson song, "The moon belongs to everyone, the best things in life are free." Surely the Great Lakes belong to everyone too. No private company carved those, glaciers did. They pelted this poor boy until he drowned, and as a result, there were massive race riots. That's a story we've told on the show, too. This is not exactly the same thing, except for the idea that he had somehow profaned a space with his unclean body. And that's what happened in places like hotel swimming pools in the South, probably other places as well. But if a black body touched the water of a whites-only swimming pool, the owners felt obliged to drain all 1,000 gallons or whatever it was and start over because it had been contaminated by what? Nothing really. Nothing that any other human being going into a body of chlorinated water wouldn't have added. But they had to make this gesture, this dominating, humiliating gesture that communicated that you are unclean, no matter how stupid or expensive or wasteful it was. That same sort of thinking kept Josh Gibson and Buck Leonard and every other worthy on the Grays and all the other Negro Leagues teams out of the American and National Leagues. I'm not saying that every player on the Grays or in the greater Negro Leagues would have excelled the way that Leonard and Gibson almost certainly would have, because that's clearly not true. There are dozens and dozens of players whose baseball cards you own who didn't thrive in the American and National Leagues, even if they got called to the majors. Same with prospects. I'm looking right now at a Pirates Future Stars card, Topps, from 1980. It depicts 3 players: first baseman Dorian Boyland, outfielder Alberto Lois, and catcher Harry Safewright. And you're saying, who? Willie Stargell? No, not Willie Stargell. Barry Bonds? Boyland, Lois, and Safewright. Have you been in an accident? Do you have chronic pain as a result of that accident? Are you looking for a generous settlement, but no commitment in advance? Then call Boyland, Lois, and Safewright. Not R.J. Reynolds, not Marvell Wynn, but Boyland, Lois, and Safewright. Boyland made it up to the bigs and went 2 for 19 over 3 seasons. That's a 105 average. He went by Doe, by the way, rather than Dorian. Lois got 4 Major League at-bats and was used as a pinch runner on the champion 1979 team. I assume he was kind of Stargell's legs, but was never allowed to bat, and I found myself wondering if his teammates voted him a full or partial World Series share. Not only did Harry Safewright never make it up, but when Topps threw him on that card, he was going on 31. I was more of a prospect than he was just because I was a little kid. The future was still in front of me, as long as I didn't play in traffic, which I sometimes did. Safewright was a catcher. At exactly that moment, Tony Pena, future 5-time All-Star, 4-time Gold Glove winner, occasional 300 hitter when he was still young. He was at Double-A, and he had just hit, this is in 1979, Buffalo, Eastern League, 313, 352, 557 with 34 home runs. Man, he wouldn't come within a country mile of that total in the majors, but still, he was 22. He would have been, I would think, the number 1 prospect in baseball. That's without my reminding myself who else was in the minors at that moment, but that's a hell of an argument for that status, or at least to be somewhere in the top 10. Buffalo hit nearly 200 home runs that year, so maybe there were some crazy park effects going on. I really don't know, but still. On that same team, outfielder Rick Lancelotti hit 287, 358, 585 with 41 home runs. Park effect or not, he was only 22. Why was he not rated a bigger prospect than Harry Safewright? At least insofar as Topps cards figured it. Lancelotti didn't really work out in the majors, hit only 2 home runs in the show, but had over 300 in his career, which included a 2-year stay with the Hiroshima Carp. So it's pretty obvious that not every Negro leaguer would translate his skills successfully to the American and National League, just as when integration finally did happen, not all of the handful who were allowed to make the initial jump became automatic stars. Similarly, I don't know that it would have been automatic that Leonard and Gibson would have been 200% better than league average hitters playing in the same league as Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams and Stan Musial. I doubt it, because the competition level is higher in an integrated league than in a segregated one. And guess what? Similarly, DiMaggio and Williams and Musial would have taken a bit of a step backwards. What I do know is that players who dominate their leagues the way that they did would have gotten the chance to try it if they had been white. Imagine in your own life some sort of unfairness of that nature that has nothing to do with your abilities, and yet somehow, maybe at your job, you haven't received the promotion that you know you deserve for reasons that are irrelevant or opaque, and you're down in the mailroom instead of in the executive suite, or the committee didn't pass your dissertation, even though all your facts are correct, or your teacher walks up to you and says, "I don't like the way you do math, so even though your test scores are just fine, I'm recommending you for the remedial class next year." And based on his recommendation or condemnation, you indeed somehow find yourself the next year in that remedial class. It's way too slow for you. It's way too easy for you. You're with kids who really don't care or aren't capable of caring. And you smash your fist down on the desk and shout, "I don't belong here." Sometimes, I imagine that's how Buck Leonard and Josh Gibson felt, ready to do their best at the most accelerated level possible. But they can't. They're not allowed to, because they are walled in by the infinite inning. Well, hello there, and welcome back to the show. You know, I'm so discombobulated. I've got the order of operations so screwed up this week. I wasn't sure if I should tell the house orchestra to strike up the theme song because we're so far along in the episode already. We're later than it typically shows up, and I only have so much more to say because, as I told you at the outset, I have been pressed like a leaf that's been stuck between pages of a book since Disraeli put it there in the 1850s. Maybe it was one of his own novels. I don't know. I've never read a Disraeli novel. I don't know why I'm thinking of Disraeli. This is a baseball program, or a baseball program that crosses over into other things, and I would say pressed like a leaf that was stuck in a book about 1880 by Pete Browning, but he couldn't read. Poor guy. Pressed into a book by Robert Browning, Elizabeth Barrett Browning? Sure, but not Pete Browning. I am, as ever, your convivial host. Not so congenial today, perhaps. Maybe not that convivial either, of the infinite inning. My name is Stephen Goldman, and my innards will soon be violated by a physician at my own invitation, and at least partially at my expense. As you can hear, I am thrilled. Allow me to beg your kind indulgence this much. Let's pause for a break here. I'll tell you all the stuff I usually do during this part of the show, plus a little bit more. And then we'll all try to recover from the extremes of this week. Over at Patreon, I've already told you that I profiled Buck Leonard. I also wrote up the very temperamental Negro leaguer Oliver Marcel, a third base glove man who had trouble getting along with disfiguring results. Also, the dead ball era outfielder Bill Holman and the early Dodgers second baseman Harry Patee. And all these guys were a lot more interesting than I thought they might have been. Well, Marcel and Leonard, I knew once the random generator rolled them up that they would be fun to talk about. Holman and Patee, I was a little more skeptical on, or of, but I found things to say. And if you read them already, I hope you enjoyed them. And if not, I hope you will drop by. As always, I made Friday's entry, Mr. Leonard, free for all comers. But I do hope that if you haven't joined up, you will. There are now well over 200 player profiles there in the system. I am 20 players or so away from being through with this second series of Dead Player of the Day posts. And after that, I'm going to need a bit of a break for a while because I have to work on some other projects, which I hope you will be hearing about in due time. However, I don't intend, as I have in the past, to just let Patreon lie, but rather I will be posting regularly there, I assume in more esoteric and blog-like fashion, although things that are still relevant, germane to the show, and just give you all more of an opportunity to interact both with the material on the show and with me if you so choose to. And as I've said in the past, it's so good when you guys post in response to those player comments or player essays, mini essays, whatever you want to call them. And it gives me an opportunity to interact with you. For whatever reason, that really hasn't happened with the Facebook group. Maybe because Facebook itself isn't as much of a thing anymore. I certainly don't love spending time there, as I've told you in the past. With Patreon, you and I control the agenda completely. There's no one shoving other stuff into our feeds, at least insofar as I've noticed. The environment just seems altogether more welcoming. Speaking of welcoming environments, I wrote at Baseball Prospectus this week a piece I called Giants America. Very inspired title, I know. And I referred back to a lot of stories that we've told on this show. In fact, in terms of the old Giants, the New York Giants, the McGraw-era Giants, really being emblematic of a lot of threads and currents in American history, including some of the ones that I referred to in this episode about Buck Leonard and Josh Gibson, but a lot more besides. And it seems to me that however many people love the San Francisco Giants, I'm not denigrating that at all. I'm not saying that the Giants should still be in New York or that it's conversely a bad thing that they're in San Francisco, but simply that when we lost touch with that era as a living entity or part of a living entity, we also lost touch with a lot of history that would be valuable for us to still be in frequent contact with. I also, as part of that story, retold in brief form the life and sad death of Harvard Eddie Grant, the Giants player who was killed trying to find the lost battalion during the First World War. And I know that I have also talked about that here on the show, as I've talked about so many things. I never really get bored of going back to that one. I find it moving for some reason. Well, for the reasons that I explain in the post, and I hope you will go to Baseball Prospectus and check that out. And now, softly, as in a morning sunrise, softly, before I leave you, I wanted to talk for just a half second about Bob Horner. He passed away this week at the age of 68. He was just a couple of months short of his 69th birthday. I don't know why the timing of one's demise always seems more tragic to me when it falls just short of when the odometer is about to turn over another digit, but that's unfortunately what happened to him. And I thought I would mention, not to beat the drum on Dead Player of the Day, I don't mean to do that, but it happened that he was one of the players who came up when I asked Baseball Reference for a suggestion, and whereas normally I feel free to throw those fellas back, it's for their own good after all, and the rubric is Dead Player of the Day. I don't mean to imply anything about those players. I have no dark foreknowledge. I chose to write about him just because I found him interesting. And I mentioned this the other day when my editor, Patrick of BP, was writing about Bob himself. And I said, well, I had done him years ago in Dead Player of the Day. And he said, were you predicting his demise? And no, I wasn't. I just decided to go with the flow on the random player generator. Since the listenership of the show is greater than either Patreon subscribers or book buyers, I had included the Bob profile in the Baseball's Brief Lives book. I thought that I would read it here, and it's not very long. It's one of the more terse entries, and not one that I fleshed out with a whole lot of contemporary quotes reflecting on him, whereas I tend to do that with almost all of them now. So since a lot of you undoubtedly hadn't seen it, I thought I would share it here. Bob Horner, third base, 1,020 games, 1978 to 1976, averages 277, 340, 499, which works out to a 127 OPS plus, 21.9 career wins above replacement. Bob Horner can break any home run record he wants to, Henry Aaron said in 1978, if he just stays healthy and plays enough games. It turned out that Aaron's conditional was everything. A star at Arizona State, Horner batted .386 with an NCAA career record 56 home runs. After thinking about Kirk Gibson, the Braves made him the first overall pick in the 1978 draft, eschewing players like Lloyd Mosby, Hubie Brooks, Mike Morgan, Gibson, and, well down in the second round, Cal Ripken Jr. They brought Horner directly to the majors. He arrived with plenty of arrogance. I think I'm going to make that Indian do a lot of dancing, he said, referring to the teepee-dwelling, woefully offensive human mascot the Braves kept behind the outfield wall in those days. But he also followed through, hitting a home run in his first game and smacking 22 more in 89 games, mostly by taking advantage of his launching pad home park. He won the Rookie of the Year award, but the pattern for his career was set: half seasons and home field hitting. He had a short swing that led to good contact rates for a power hitter, and a grand approach for hitting fly balls that tended to go out in Atlanta, but it did less on the road. Constant injuries, some of which stemmed from a lack of conditioning. Joe Torre tried to motivate him by making him team captain. Whitey Herzog just called him Buddha, kept him off the field for more than his 306 official days on the disabled list. Caught up in collusion after 1986, he went to Japan and hit 31 home runs in 93 games, but also spent time on the shelf there. Herzog, asked about him that winter, said, I don't like Horner. Of his lifetime homers, about 70% were hit in Atlanta. He never could hit in St. Louis. He can't hit, and he can't field. The Cardinals showed what they thought of Herzog's opinion, signing the portly infielder to replace departed free agent Jack Clark. This seemed like a sign that Herzog's influence was waning, something that proved to be true over the next couple of seasons. Horner's return to the majors was about what Herzog expected. Horner hit .257, .348, .354, and after his chronically injured left shoulder prevented him from making the Orioles in 1989, Horner quit for good. As I said, that is one of the more terse entries. Normally, I feel free to philosophize and analyze a lot more, just spread things out and try to add value to a raw statement of facts. That one is a little bit closer to that. I will say now, and should have said then, that there is a whole lot of what could have been with Bob Horner, a sort of Tony Canigliaro style what might have been, because this is a guy who had 138 home runs by the time that he was 24, and that included a partial season in 1981, not due to injuries for once, but because the entire game was shut down over the owners and players having a labor dispute, something which we're intensely familiar with even today. Canigliaro's injury, of course, was more dramatic. He took a ball to the eye. Horner's were chronic, and no doubt they were exacerbated by the lack of conditioning that I mentioned, but probably a lot of it was just not his fault. Not every athlete has the genetic makeup or the body, however you want to put it, to withstand the grind of a 162-game season. Again, it's not their fault. There's only so much they can do about it. Look at Giancarlo Stanton. There's not an ounce of fat on the guy, but he's on the IL as often as not. One thing that I've learned from doing this show and from doing those Dead Player of the Day posts is an awareness of just how often I've written out, well, this guy was incredible in his 20s, but there was something that clicked off like a light as soon as he hit 30. And Bob Horner was like that. Collusion helped. Weight gain helped, but his career functionally ended when he was 28. Just 5 more years at his pace when he was young, he would have been easily over 400 home runs, and not that many third basemen have done that. Park effects or not, it would have been a big deal, but he just wasn't up to it. Maybe if you're a Whitey Herzog, that still means you don't want him on your baseball team, but who among us out here can't empathize with that? Bon voyage and safe journey, Bob Horner. Folks, since this is a mini episode of sorts, I will also say a mini farewell until next time. Thank you for stopping by the show, and all of you stay healthier than I've been able to stay of late. And assuming we all take care of ourselves, I'll see you next week with more tales from inside the infinite inning.